Hey there, I'm Theo, and thank you for joining me once again. In today's video, we'll be talking about the worst legendaries ever in Hearthstone. I got thinking about this because there was a bit of discussion in my chat about what kind of terrible legendaries there have been. So I wanted to look back at 10 years of Hearthstone and see what were the 10 worst legendaries in those years. Now, I do have a few rules for this list. First of all, we look at every version of a card. So for example, a card like the Jailer, it's awful right now, but before the nerf, it was pretty good, so obviously that one won't be on the list. We're also looking at both Standard and Wild, so while a card may have been terrible on Standard, if it's all playing Wild, it won't be on this list. Also, I will be including like meme legendaries. Cards like Cho'Gall and Nosdormo I don't think really belong on this list, so I won't be putting them here. And lastly, also Millhouse Manastorm won't be on this list. Well, yeah, this is a terrible legendary. It did actually see play for a brief moment in Standard when we had Cold Arms, which was a crazy good card. So that's why it won't be on this list. But yeah, outside of that, this card is terrible. So let's now go to the worst legendaries. And let's start with number 10. We have Sheldraw's Moontree here, an 8 mana 5/5 Battlecry. The next 3 spells you draw are cast when run. Now, you might be thinking, why is this on the list? Because it might have a good effect. But if you start thinking about it, you kind of have to build your deck in such a way for this card that you just make your deck worse by including this. Because what you want to do with this is basically only have expensive spells in it. And that means you're not including staples in Druid, like say an Innervate or Aquatic Form, and yeah, you want those in your deck. And then if you're including big spells, you're only gonna have a couple. So if you've already drawn those, this won't work. If you play this for 8 mana, well, it's a terrible tempo play. And then you're still gonna have to draw the cards. And how do you draw cards usually in Druid? Well, it's those cheap spells that you don't want to be running anymore. And then on top of that, some of the more expensive spells you might want to be playing, like maybe an Ultimate Devastation or some other draw cards. Well, if you get a couple of those in a row, you might just burn a ton of cards, or your hand is full. It's just terrible to draw those. So yeah, this card is pretty awful, and I think it deserves its spot at number 10. Then at number 9, we have Mimiron's Head, card from GVG. It's a 5 mana 4/5 mech. At the start of your turn, if you have at least 3 mechs, destroy them all and form Voltron, which is a 4/8 charged Mega Wind Fury mech, which means it can attack 4 times. So it is basically 60 damage. Now, what makes this card so bad is, of course, that Mimiron's Head has to survive for a turn, and you need at least 2 other mechs because it does include itself in the 3 mechs. And yeah, it's basically telling your opponent, hey, kill my mechs, or you might lose the game. And even then, even if you somehow have 3 mechs survive, you probably already would have won the game. But if it does, in the end, all you get is 16 damage. So it doesn't even quite win the game. And there was also no Magnetize back then. So it's not like you could easily buff this card. And if you were playing spells to buff this card, then yeah, you were playing less mechs and that made it harder to proc. So that's why this card is at number 9. Now at number 8 we have the Skeleton Knight, a 6 mana 7/4. Deathrattle reveal a minion in each deck. If your cost more, return this to your hand. Now this Deathrattle is the Joust mechanic, and it's probably the worst mechanic we've ever had in Hearthstone. This mechanic was so inconsistent that you basically never wanted to have this kind of card in your deck. And yeah, what is this card? It's a 6 mana 7/4. I mean, terrible stats. Terrible tempo play. Yeah, it might have been an 8-year-old card, but yeah, even then, this was absolutely terrible. And all you get is as an upside is that maybe you get this card back in your hand, so you can lose even more tempo if you get it back. And on top of that, if you wanna you kind of use the Deathrattle, you're gonna have to build your deck a bit more expensive. And what that means is you're gonna have more expensive cards in your hand that you rather play than this. And you're not gonna be running out of cards because you play a bunch of expensive cards. So yeah, completely awful cards, and you never ever want to play this one. Then at number 7 we have Commander Ulthok, a 5 mana 7/7. Battlecry, your opponent's card costs health instead of mana next turn. Now I've seen some people try and play this, because yeah, maybe you bring your opponent low to health, and then you play this, and then they can't play the minions. But at that point, it's basically, yeah, you've already pretty much won the game. And then, yeah, you could have played a better card than this. But the downside, of course, of this card is that if your opponent isn't low health, or you're not ahead, this is pretty much just unplayable. You just don't want to give your opponent basically mana cheat what this is, and let them play their combo cards or combinations that otherwise would never be possible. And yeah, just a gigantic tempo loss playing this card. And all you get, you get a 5 mana 7/7. Who cares about the stats when your opponent can play, for example, some massive minions for no mana? When, yeah, they don't really care about losing the health, maybe, because the tempo they gain with the cards they're playing makes up for that. Now, then at number 6, we have Eris the Bat. You might have actually seen this card maybe at some point, but it was probably because it got evolved or a random 8 drop. And yeah, that pretty much made your opponent want to concede when it showed up. Now, what this card does is, it's an 8 mana 1/1, fill your board with copies of this minions as a battle cry. So yeah, this is pretty much a card you want to be buffing, but it really got only one buff card with it in Warlock, which was Spirit of the Bat. And yeah, that wasn't a very good card either. And that, yeah, pretty much made you lose tempo by playing it. You had to have a bunch of minions on the board, your opponent had to have a bunch of minions on the board, you had to have a Reek in hand, then you had to trade your minions. And then it had to hit Herik, which meant, well, your other minions didn't get buffed and you lost tempo. And that is basically the ideal situation. And yeah, top decking is late, it's awful. You don't have Spirit of the Bat, it's awful. Your opponent doesn't have minions, yeah, you can't trade to get the buff. This card just never works, and that's why it's at number 6. Then at number 5, we have the most recent card on this list, which is Slagmaw the Slumbering, a 4 mana 16/16 Rush Taunt, dormant for 6 turns, Excavate to awaken 2 turns sooner. Now, this card even got buffed by 2 turns. It used to be 8 turns dormant, and it's still absolutely awful. Now, why is this awful? It's because you pretty much never want to play this. The best case scenario is you play this on turn 4, and then you excavate the next 2 turns, and then it awakens in 2 turns, and you have a 4 mana 16/16. That's the best case scenario, but when does that matter? Maybe against like an aggro deck it matters, but you can't really fort against aggro decks. Just have 4 mana, do nothing. So you don't really want to play it against aggro. And then against slower decks, usually they have easy removal for this, and then this card also doesn't really work. And that is all if you play it on turn 4. That is the best case scenario. Now, you don't play it on turn 4 and have Excavates in hands. Like, yeah, this card just does absolutely nothing. You top deck it, you play the Excavate rewards. Well, you gotta wait 6 turns for this card. No, I don't think you are. You top deck it, but yeah, you need tempo, because your opponent is playing their cards, of course. Yeah, you can't afford to play this. Just a card you never want to be playing, and that's why it's number 5. And at number 4, we have Harbinger Celestia, a 4 mana 5/6 with Stealth. And the text after your opponent plays a minion, become a copy of it. So basically this is Mirror Entity in minion form, but it loses all the benefits of having a secret, where your opponent doesn't know what it is, and all the other synergies that come with secrets, like getting it from like a mad scientist, or having to play it cheaper with, or reduce other cards that require secrets. Just, it loses all the synergy that secrets have. And it tells your opponent that, yeah, your next minion gets copied, so that just allows them to play a small minion, or lets them remove it. You never want to be playing this. You're probably getting like a 1-drop. Then at number 3, I have the Boogie monster, an 8 mana 6/7. Whenever this attacks and kills a minion, gain +2/+2. So yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with this, why this is a legendary. It has terrible stats for the cost, and then all it does is gain +2/+2 stats if you kill a minion. So what you have to do is, at turn 8, play a 6/7, then it has to not die. Then they have to have a minion you want to attack into, and then this survives, and all you get is +2/+2 stats. And then, yeah, basically you have an 8/9, then you have to attack again, and then again, and then all you get is +2/+2 stats after killing a minion. And yeah, back then there was also no rush, so yeah, why would you ever want to play this card? Just makes no sense how this card got made. And that's why it is number 3. And then at number 2, we have a card that is actively helping your opponent win the game, which is Temporus, a 7 mana 6/6 dragon. Battlecry, your opponent takes 2 turns. then you take 2 turns. So yeah, you basically time warp for the opponent while spending 7 mana on this. Not only do you make a terrible play by playing this card, you also give your opponent an extra turn, and you give them the knowledge to have an extra turn, so they can set up their combo stuff maybe, or they can just map out lethal in 2 turns. And yeah, just absolutely awful. You just don't want to be playing this in almost any matchup, and it's just completely dead because it's not like you can tempo this because, well, it's basically good tempo for your opponent. The only upside of this, of course, is that you do take 2 turns afterwards, so that is the one upside to this card. But that's probably going to be relevant in so few matchups, and it just really isn't worth it. You just can't play this card in most matchups, and I don't think maybe the few matchups can say it, like maybe a Control Warrior it can be worth it against. Like, yeah, this doesn't make up for it, and that's why it's at number 2. And then, of course, at number 1, what else could it have been? It's Duskfallen Aviana. A 5 mana 3/7. On each player's turn, the first card played costs 0. Yeah, what this does is just give your opponent a ton of mana cheat, play their expensive cards for free, and yeah, this card is never gonna survive. So you're never gonna use the effect yourself. And best case, I think we can say it's maybe a taunt against like an aggro deck that wants to clear it. But then you gave them just a free card, so that's not even worth it. Just completely awful card. There's no reason to play this. You just help your opponent win the game. And there is pretty much no upside to playing this card. And yeah, that's why I think it deserves the number 1 spot, because it's just the best card for your opponent. So yeah, that is it for my 10 worst cards. Let me know what you think of it. Do you agree with this list, or are you missing certain legendaries? If you liked this video, it would help me out a lot if you liked or subscribed. Thank you for watching, and until next time.